Looks like we've got a bunch of participants joining us. So excited for you guys to be with us today. And in a moment, we'll get started. I'm Ron Stefanski. I'm the co-host of this event, along with our sponsor, Skill Trade. And we have an incredible group of people lined up to listen to today in this conversation. That's really a critical conversation about the state of our healthcare system and the crisis many hospitals in the public health system are dealing with in terms of the key component of delivering primary care to people, and that's the quality of the people doing the jobs on the front lines. And so today we're going to get started here. Jason Aubrey, CEO of Skill Trade and the sponsor of this conversation. Jason, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to throw some of the questions over to you. We have four leading thought leaders in the workforce, upskilling, and healthcare industry. I mean, it's rare in my experience as a podcast host and as an influencer out there to be able to bring four super high octane talents here. And here's how I would describe high octane talents. They're people who know their stuff. They have a lot of subject matter expertise. They have a lot of direct experience, and they also all share one thing in common. They all have a high GSD index. Now, what do I mean by the high GSD index? It means they get stuff done. These are doers. They're not just thinkers. They are thought leaders. They are thought doers. So join with me also. Shout out to Tammy Eshleman, the Director of Workforce Development for Trinity Health. Tammy, so great to have you today. Thank you for joining us. Jeff Roche, Senior Vice President of RisePoint. Jeff, great to see you. And last, but certainly not least, Dr. Jackie Skryd from National University, the VP of Professional and Continuing Ed and Workforce. So we have these four folks out here, and I'm going to get right into it. Given the current labor market, we're seeing talent shortages everywhere, but notably in the healthcare sector. So my first question out to all four of you is, where should organizations be focusing their resources to get at those new talent pools that traditional recruitment methods often miss? I mean, we're past the point of just being able to send out job notices and get people. So Tammy, I think I'll start with you.
All right. Well, I would just say every untapped or undertapped talent supply source that we can find, that is where we have to focus. And we have to make sure that we create open door pathways into healthcare. We make it very hard. We understand with patient safety and quality, we have to maintain that. But really, it's opening the doors to all for a healthcare career. And so it is those that are underserved, those that have barriers socioeconomically into getting into career pathways, and it's really showing the possibilities of a healthcare career. So I would say we want the undertapped and untapped talent supply. That's high school career changers, anyone out there in our community. And why? Because healthcare is all about our community. And that's why we have to partner and be one with our communities and open these doors.
And I've seen some success with health systems actually working directly with local high schools, having high school career fairs, talking directly to active seniors or those who have just graduated. It really depends too on the occupation that you're trying to fill, whether it could be filled with a certification program, skills-based training, or if we're talking associates, bachelor's, or an advanced degree, tapping into the high school system, even sponsoring those students, bringing forward like affordable programs under the tuition reimbursement, 5250 is a great option. I think employers should look for training providers that have articulation agreements with higher ed. Because to Tammy's point, we're talking about, building that feeder system, that talent acquisition pipeline. But the ultimate goal is to help those individuals attain advanced degrees. One quick thing I wanted to mention too is, tapping the underserved population. What's good to see is that there seems to be more funding available for serving the underserved populations, whether it's through your workforce agency. There's a growing trend in incumbent worker training where you can upskill internal staff, or we like to call them internal mobility candidates. And then apprenticeship training, right? It's a growing trend, and it's funny, like the way we're talking about apprenticeship training, it's almost like we think it's something new. I just think the bell bottoms are coming back, right? This whole trend from the past is coming back because it actually works. One other thing I do want to talk about, and I'd love to hear the group's opinion on, is loan repayment programs. With the new big beautiful bill, there's only so much debt and loans that the federal government will offer those seeking advanced degrees. And I think that is going to be pretty cumbersome for the higher education system in terms of the supply. But I think employers can step up, work with organizations like Tandem or CLASP, who have partnerships with higher ed, to offer loan repayment programs, right? Imagine a nurse coming out with $50,000 to $100,000 in debt. That employer can pay that debt off over 4 years. You fill a role, you improve retention.
Well, that's a really important consideration is the retention. But Jason, before we move on to your second question, I want to go back to something you said about, serving the underserved populations out there. I mean, you're someone who actually practices what you preach. I had the opportunity, folks, to join Jason and his team as they delivered a new program in healthcare training to the folks at Focus Hope right here in downtown Detroit. Now, these are all people who are underserved and are looking for a leg up and are looking for a good paying job and are working adults with families. I had the opportunity to interview some of the folks at the coffee hour and a lot of career changers. One woman told me about the fact that she was an insurance processor for 25 years.
Yep.
And she said, I just want something new. And she was so excited to participate in this training. And she already had a job. Even as she was graduating, she said, yeah, I already have a job. So I think the possibilities are there, Jason, certainly. Other thoughts from the rest of the group here?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to build on what Jason and Tammy were saying when you talk about untapped talent pools. A lot of that coming from education. So I worked in both workforce development and I work in higher education now and have for the past 15 years. But that, what we're seeing, we talk about partnerships, right? And creating and driving that awareness. And how you can, one, partner with your local educational entity, whether it's a community college, a technical school, the high schools like Jason was mentioning, the university. National University serves what we call ANDers. So they're the adult learner, the and parent, and veteran, and. So you're seeing individuals who are looking to better themselves. And what can happen is if the business is partnering closely, whether they're serving, engaging on an advisory board, and actually supporting the skill development specifically for the top occupations that you're looking to fill, you can influence that. You can have a direct feed into your talent pipeline. So you're not necessarily having to go work with different firms to help get that talent. You're working directly with it and influencing what those skills are. So it's a little bit more longer term. It can be something quick like an advisory board, but there's a way to tap in there. And then on the other side to the community partner, really with the, what it doesn't matter what the nonprofit is, creating those awareness, that awareness, those pathways for individuals to know what those jobs are. They don't know, they really don't. And so the clearer that is for them and the more that you're engaging with those partnerships, they're the voice for you. So helping to reach within the schools, helping to reach within those who are unemployed, the veterans, whatever, adult learners, or even older workers, right? How do you tap into them? Those nonprofits, those partnerships are a way to do that.
One of our participants, Sulin, just mentioned going out into the community and educating people. And I think that's kind of what you're rounding up around is this idea that we have to take education to people where they're at and where they're at intellectually and where they're at professionally, but also where they're at physically to get education into the right place at the right time. I also saw a comment as you were talking, Dr. Jackie, from someone who's in career transition right now and looking to get in and has a master's in public health and is looking into getting into the healthcare field. So if you're one of those guests and participants out there who's in that position, I have to tell you, I've had time off camera with all four of these thought leading titans, and they're all insistent upon providing their contact information so you can reach out and contact any of them directly, especially if you're looking for work in this. We want to recruit you into the healthcare space, and so please, by all means, reach out to any one of these four people. They're welcome, they'll welcome your questions and your interest, certainly. So going back to it, let's move on to another question. Beyond traditional job placement rates, what are the most critical metrics and data points that high-performing workforce programs are looking at now? Because you've got to look at the ROI, and so I'm curious what you're using to measure that.
I call them metrics that matter. And I think it varies by organization. What's key to workforce development is being a partner to the business and being a partner to all of HR, operations leaders, understanding what's happening at the front lines of healthcare and working with that flow. So I always like to have a conversation with the C-suite as well as operational leaders to say, what metrics matter, and partnering with talent acquisition and others in HR. So I look at things like staffing cost savings, reducing our contingent labor costs. You have 23 vacancies for surge tech, and you could be spending millions of dollars. That is a solvable problem. I look at it as a challenge as an opportunity, and let's solve it. And that problem has been solved in my experience. So we have to have the discussion around business needs. We need to look at time to fill. We need to look at, can we open more surgery centers? Oh, we can't because we don't have the staffing. That is hurting our business goals as well in healthcare in general. So retention, we know that people will leave an organization if they don't have career development opportunities. And so building stackable opportunities. I mean, I've lived this. I started in the front lines of healthcare in doctors' offices, and I built my career and stayed 27 years in an organization, in part because of tuition opportunities and support that I received. And so if you want to build loyalty, you build your own talent supply chain on top of the other ways that you're gathering talent. It's not really to replace, it's about adding to your talent strategies and thinking holistically. And I like looking at training costs as well, because I have a learning development background as well. So I always have to look there and think about how can we deliver quality, but looking at reducing training spend so we can reach more people. If it's the organization or we're using funding, how do we do that in partnership with higher ed, with different training partners that we can bring in, and really being collaborative together to look at that cost. And I also think another metric that matters, especially right now in the healthcare world that we are in, and other industries can understand this as well. We are going to be redesigning roles due to different reimbursement challenges we're facing. And I know over the last 30 years in healthcare, we've seen this. But when we redesign roles, we don't want to lose good incumbent workers. So we have to get those folks ready now for the new roles in healthcare that are going to emerge so we can take them and transition them and quickly upskill, or as quickly as possible, into these critical, hard to fill roles. And then there's loyalty that's baked in as well. So that is kind of the big picture, but it really gets down to having a conversation and asking what metrics matter, looking at your strategic goals for the organization, and then looking to see what are some workforce development opportunities. Even if it doesn't say it's workforce development, look for that opportunity. That is key to success.
Tammy, that's great insight into this. We're blessed with a bunch of very animated, dynamic guests and participants in this call. And I just want to shout out to Dr. Tina, who's talking about recommending co-creating these programs with the community and involving them in human-centered design as a critical component in that. So to build on your comments, I think that's a great insight as well. So now I want to turn our attention to apprenticeships and how are these contemporary apprenticeship models. That's all you hear about in the workforce circuit these days, on the conference circuit, is apprenticeships. But how are these evolving in allied health, and what role is a short-term certificate programs going to play in building pre-apprenticeship pathways? There's a comment on the feed that people are having a hard time getting good RPN and good RNs for care coordinating roles. And so we've got this crisis going on. So how can these apprenticeship roles evolve to meet that need? And I'll start with you, Jackie.
Look like Geoffrey.
I'm just going to punt it over to Geoffrey.
It looks like he was ready to go.
Go ahead, Geoffrey. I'll follow up on you.
I think around I mean, what I was just going to say is like the most important point here is really creating stackable pathways, right? I mean, what so much of what Tammy was saying is really about career and economic mobility. And if you think about, I mean, I'm the son of a union carpenter apprentice and the son of a nurse. And when I look at what both of their experience were like, they truly, like to Tammy's point, had true pathways. The reality is healthcare has been so slow to have apprenticeship pathways. But when you look at the examples where they've existed, they've actually been phenomenal. If you go and I've had the opportunity many times to go to UW Health in Madison, Wisconsin, where they've built their own scalable apprenticeship model, and we're far ahead of anyone else in the country. And now they have 3 apprenticeship degrees with a local college. They have, hundreds of youth apprentices, actually just over 100. They just crossed the over 100 mark. And all of those youth apprentices will earn a national level certification by the time they turn 18. That's how you do this. Now, when you think about it, though, around scalability, I look at it as how do you leverage a skills, and training provider like a skilled trade, and how do you use that as your own academy? When I think about L&D, the biggest thing I've always said, and Tammy, I think will resonate with this, is that in healthcare, L&D tends to be the smallest function generally to support a very large part of the organization. But if you can be innovative and strategic and partner with training provider like a skilled trade and an academic institution or several, and literally see it as your own academy and build that around all the different needs that you have, I think you're in a much stronger position to actually deliver what truly not only become life-changing, but also dramatic changes to the workforce. Now, I will say this for my colleagues that work in healthcare, and I don't have to say this because I know Tammy's done this. Your HR folks also have to be willing to change who they are and what they do. For apprenticeships to work, it means we have to knock down the silos of many job descriptions. We have to change how we code roles. We have to think differently. We have to also train people around how we handle apprentices. I just turned 40, but what I know is this, which means I'm older than Jason Aubrey. What I know is this. We have got to treat the younger people like the future healthcare leader that they are. And so we have to lift them up, mentor, make sure we have mentorship in there. I mean, apprenticeships and youth apprenticeships only work if we have people to coach them, give them the hope and opportunity. And so I would just strongly suggest, like for our HR folks and our business leaders in healthcare, this is the future. If you want a future sustainable workforce, you got to have a skills training provider in partnering with you. You've got to have apprenticeships, youth apprenticeships, and you certainly have to have pathways.
Sulan's been a regular participant in the chat, and he's talked about what you're saying now, and shares this comment, which I think is so incredibly important. It is about aligning on shared objectives and goals, but it's also not just collaborating, but achieving results together with your partners. And I think each of you has had a big role in establishing partnerships, and I think that's really important. Now, once you get into the weeds and you're in an incumbent worker environment, what are some of the biggest operational barriers you're finding, and what can the employer do in that case? I'd say probably a lot of them involve scheduling, fear of failure, lack of time, family obligations, just to name a few. So how do we help people with those barriers so that they can actually take advantage of what you're trying to offer?
Yeah,
Tammy, I'll start with you.
Schedule is definitely an issue. As soon as a healthcare work, as soon as I hear a two-year pathway and that you have to have that for an incumbent worker, talent supply, that is a real challenge. And so that would be a big part of this. And again, some of our healthcare careers require that, to be able to be hired. So again, I heard stackable earlier. I heard getting creative and partnership. So, working with partners who are innovative in education and training, and saying, how do we create a program together with industry and others to say, employers allow for some paid training time. But then how do you fund that? Again, it's needing this whole ecosystem working together because, Geoffrey was saying in HR, we need to be, moving this forward, but we're also facing a crisis in healthcare and we're just trying to survive. And so that's where having a team that's dedicated to workforce development, I'll put a plug out there for organizations that say we need to have a workforce development team or we need to have people really focused on that. You don't get stuck in the reactionary, you get stuck in look at the strategic. So what we can do is think about how do we provide clinical rotations, clinical experiences, while providing paid trainee experience. I've seen this firsthand out over the years where, you can become a surge tech because you can provide that time for them to get their clinical cases that they need to get. But you have to really be strategic and you got to work with your partners and not try to do it in a vacuum. And I also get concerned because, our local schools do a great job. Higher ed is so important, but when you hear hundreds apply for a rad tech program and only 30 get in, and I've heard this across the country, that is a real challenge. So what did you do with the 70 plus that didn't get into that cohort? We have to really open up doors and we need to say, we're not replacing traditional ways to get in, but we're trying to build additional ways to get our incumbent workers, to get people who have other socioeconomic barriers to allow for that. So we have to be open as employers and engage clinical leaders to see new opportunities for certifications that maybe don't require as long a training time. We need to be open to that. And then really helping to open the doors to healthcare careers and allowing to ensure that we're providing the clinical experiences in a way that our incumbent workers can stay working with us. So that's kind of that's my 20 cents on that topic. I could go on, but it's really about we all have to partner together and really look at this from the eyes of the people out there in our workforce that they want to upskill, but they can't afford to quit and they don't want to miss their son's soccer game. We have to figure out ways to do this together.
Right. I've heard the line said repeatedly throughout the last 6 months, there's no one coming to save us. And so I want to take a minute to just shout out to our audience. It's always a dynamic challenge to make sure that our message and our conversation resonates with our participants and guests. Who are listening in. And I have to say, if you're following the chat, there's some really, really great insights to be shared. Shout out to Kyle Castro and to Dr. Tina again. Just to build on what you were saying, they talked about the importance of mentoring. And I think mentorship is also another important component in that. Wouldn't you guys agree? I see a lot of nodding heads among our guests. I'm going to move on to the next question. So we're talking about upskilling and retention. We've got to talk about tuition benefits and a training mandate. Over the last 10 years, we've seen employers move the pyramid of training. So they used to provide training on a very small level to the top employers, to the high, what they used to call the high pots, the high potential people. And over the last 10 years, we've seen that change. And companies are flipping the script on training, and they're looking at what's now become known as education as a benefit programs. And you see a lot of companies with first line employees. This is happening in the QSR world. This is happening in the retail world. And they're flipping the script and providing a lot of upskilling. I also see this happening now in the healthcare sector, and they're taking some cues from what big folks like Walmart and McDonald's are doing to say, hey, we need to expand what we're offering people because it is a challenge to keep and retain and develop our employees. So, Jeff, let's start with you and Jason to talk a little bit about tuition benefit and the training, versus the training mandate.
Yeah, my thoughts on this, I would say, are several, right? I mean, some healthcare systems have bought into, certainly leveraging a guild or an Ed Assist or, Workforce Edge or one of those. And I mean, at the end of the day, those are platforms and channels to reach many different institutions. At the end of the day, what I would say is this. I mean, I think to get what Tammy was saying, as an employer, regardless of whether you go into something like that to help you manage your tuition, I've got a lot of opinions on it because it does mean you potentially limit and don't have other partners at the table who may actually be more nimble to actually help you solve some of it just because they're not able to get at the same table, whether it's size or different things. But the positive is there's more people actually talking about education as a benefit. Now, recognizing that piece, what I would strongly suggest is that employers remember, yes, 5250 is what you're allowed to do for tuition reimbursement. But that does not stop you from doing other innovative ways in workforce development. Some of the most innovation that I've seen, including when Tammy was leading workforce at a system I knew very well that she led at, is through the foundation. And so I think systems need to really look at how you can leverage philanthropy, how you can really get at some of those systems level design thinking that can truly dramatically improve a community. I've also seen some systems invest with their own operational dollars. To Tammy's point, I've worked with a surge tech department in Advent Health where they specifically had a significant challenge. And they said, we need to upskill from our existing workforce to become our future surgical technologists. Well, that's where if you have a training provider that can scale quickly to deliver what's needed there, get them certified, get them the experience that's critical, get them that clinical experience, then you can also create that longevity of an employee. I'll say the data is clear. Younger people, to Tammy's earlier point, want to see investment in them. And when their employer says, we'll invest in you to grow, because remember, we're not going to stick around for a boring position. When you invest in us to continue to grow and enhance our skills, enhance our abilities, we will stick around and we'll continue to be that, wonderful performer. And so that's some of the thoughts I would share.
And
Lisa
Geoffrey
Smith
and
is
Tammy,
out there, and she said, "Oh, go ahead, Jason. I'm
yeah,
sorry."
love to hear your thoughts and opinions on my opinion on this regarding education as a benefit and those platforms specifically. I mean, first of all, I'm a big fan of them. I think they've had a lot of value in the industry. But the way I view them is like the primary value propositions or potentially how employers view them is that it's a recruitment tool and a retention tool. It's not a means to actually solve critical staffing shortages. And so I think there's a difference between looking at that and saying to your entire workforce, we offer tuition assistance because we want you to continue your education and to upskill, versus we have 20 open positions to become a surge tech. We could potentially use education as a benefit as the means to do this. But to your point, you may limit yourselves in picking the right training provider. You also may not have direct relationship and partnership with that training provider, and therefore like miss out on, potentially some of the requirements like Tammy mentioned for surge tech, getting those case observations or the clinical rotations and working with preceptors. And I was kind of curious if you're seeing similar trends in the industry, like from that perspective, and how our employers actually thinking about either using one or the other, or potentially thinking about using multiple solutions to solve critical staffing shortages outside of just education as a benefit.
We have to look at I look at everything now. I think back in the day, we were thinking, oh, there's going to be one solution, and there's not. And I feel like I always make more things more complex than they really are, but that's healthcare, that's life in general. But I believe it is, you look at the issue at hand and a solution that fits for one critical need that might be, a 4+ year program could be quite different, and the tuition debt that comes with it could be quite different than shorter term programs. And also in my past, it's really a decision you have to make on how quickly do I need to solve this challenge? Sometimes you can't wait 18 months it used to be in years prior, workforce development. Oh, we're going to help solve the 18 to 24 months out. No. And I love saying this, I can solve a challenge in 7 weeks sometimes. It depends on the need. So what I really would like to do, and I have found very beneficial, Jason, is working with thought leaders like yourself and Geoffrey and Dr. Jackie, and being able to say, okay, here's my need. Instead of me trying, healthcare worker in me was always like, we can fix this ourselves. And I realized, you can't just fix it yourself. Why reinvent the wheel? We have to be agile. We have to know what's going on outside of ourselves and even in other industries like shipbuilding and other things, to be able to take that and apply lessons learned. So I think if we only look at one solution, it's short-sighted. We have to look at any kind, be aware of what else is out there, and always come to the table with, here's a couple things that we can consider. But one solution is not always, it's not going to solve everything.
I think the strategy overall, it sounds like what I'm hearing from the four of you needs to be inclusive. And again, we have participants weighing in on this. Kelsey makes a really good point, not to exclude the operations staff who make up a large part of healthcare systems. We have to, what we're constructing is a talent strategy and an upskilling strategy that is inclusive and looking at everyone in the mix, because it's essential to include both clinical and non-clinical talent with pathways so they feel it. Lisa Smith-Maxim is also weighing in and says, they do training in a certificate program to demonstrate that the firm values them and their employees give them feedback that they love this. So I think the practice of inclusion and what you're talking about is really, really important. Let's turn our attention now to certificates, certifications, and degrees. We see market resistance from incumbent staff who have debt from 2-year degrees questioning the value of a fast track certification. We see people questioning the value of a college degree anymore. And so how can employers and academic partners best message the value of, what you described earlier, Geoffrey, as stackable credentials and short-term programs as a debt-free feeder system into a degree program? Because I think money has become an issue. The cost of tuition has become an issue. We have people out there with $1.5 trillion of student debt. That is not an insignificant number, and we have to address that in some of the ways that these programs are evolving into certificate programs and shorter form programs. Jackie, let's have you weigh in on that.
Yeah, so, as an educator, you see how institutions are trying to build these stackable, these pathways where they can essentially accelerate their education and reduce the cost. So if they're having to pay it on their own, right, you're looking at institutions, and community colleges are really good at this primarily because they're workforce centered, right? Universities, we have a lot of theoretical programs that, maybe don't necessarily embed industry recognized certifications within a program of study, but you're starting to see that uptick and more of those programs being offered. But how can they take, and you'll hear it every day, well, I don't have the time, going back to your earlier question, I don't have the time to complete a degree or to go to get my master's, but I can maybe do a short-term certification that's very narrowly focused on a skill set I want to develop. Well, how can you work when you get that, does that count towards a degree? And so the institutions are building those pathways where it does. You get that credit for prior learning, you're getting that credit for the short-term certification. So there is a value there if they're investing in that, or the employer's investing in that, or it's being paid for out of some type of public funding that they have access to. And then that accelerates their time to completion. So they're building those articulations to create those, we talk about the stackable credentials to accelerate that. So they're paying less, they're finishing quicker, and they just basically piece out that, that certification. They don't have to do that training anymore. Then they focus on the skills, that's remaining for whatever program that is. So you're seeing the buildup of that. Some of it takes time, but the more and more that institutions are doing that, the better off everyone is.
Well, you're seeing this with a lot of different industries where we have made the cost of higher education so expensive that people are now really examining its ROI, and they're thinking college isn't for everyone. And so these non-degree programs and certifications are emerging as an alternative. I also think we've placed more of the burden on any kinds of these educational programs on the employers and on employees themselves, because the feds are not stepping in with funding and state funding is moving away from reimbursing these programs. So as we're looking at different ways to pay for these, I think it's really important that we, someone asked about a clawback program or a reimbursement program. I think when you're talking about basic training, this should be something that employers just simply need to recognize as a cost of doing business. They're going to have people showing up that aren't fully ready to do the job. And so upskilling them to make sure they're hitting the ground running is an investment the company is going to have to make. And we're seeing more of that. So I tend to agree with Jeff. There's been some chat going on here about this, and I agree with Jeff that I don't think they should be reimbursed. And one of the biggest programs that I was involved with, where they decided not to have a clawback policy, is at McDonald's. McDonald's started offering a series of programs to their employees to, at 14,000 stores. You're talking about 850,000 people. They've spent $180 million over the last 10 years building out these programs. They see it as an investment, and they've seen the results of it. They don't measure it in terms of what they measured in terms of is long-term impact. How long do these people stay? Because if you have people leaving every 6 months and you have to replace them at a cost of $5,000, $6,000, you're putting your money in the wrong place. We should not be putting it into recruiting. We should put it, we can easily shift that as employers are finding into retention programs. So let's talk about more about what you guys have all been sort of hinting at, and that's the public-private partnerships and compliance. For established universities, what's the single most critical structural operational change they must make? And obviously, Jackie, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Well, a lot of this, bureaucracy, right? The red tape that you have to go through from a university standpoint, especially when it comes to accreditation, your typical 12 to 18-month process to even, that's maybe short to develop a new program. But there's a lot of ways that, and I just kind of shared it a little bit. That bureaucracy is probably the biggest barrier, certainly to set up any new programs. Jason knows this. We're talking about it for, how do we establish a CCMA program and deliver that online and really support meeting the workforce where they are. But it comes down to accreditation and compliance, and what are those things that we need to be thinking about so we still maintain our accreditation, because that's the standard that we're put up against as a university. But at the same time, knowing that we have to meet and address the skills and the demands of corporations faster, right? And so, embedding some of those credentials, bringing in those applied activities, bringing in cases, what are those things that we can do to sort of navigate through those barriers? You're seeing more institutions, more of those workforce-centric activities happening around different universities. And like I said already, with community colleges, but I would say that's one of our biggest challenges, but I think they're navigating ways through that. And certainly with the partnerships of industry and being at the table, coming in and talking to students, maybe as the guest lecturer, being able to influence those activities of what's happening day to day in their learning. Those are types of things that we can, sort of help break the barriers a bit.
I think those are all good suggestions. I think I was listening to you and simultaneously reading some commentary from Deborah Eade, who runs Voices for Health, a language access agency out in Grand Rapids. Thanks for joining us, Deborah. And one of the things she talked about is launching a program to community college scholarships for ASL interpreters. I think that that's what's happening with the realization that no one's coming to save us. I think other creative community organizations have stepped in to help this. So it's not just employers that are helping. It's community organizations like that are taking their part to say, hey, we can help by accelerating the number of people who go into community college because we'll offer a scholarship program. Detroit's doing that. The Detroit Promise now allows that anyone that graduates from a Detroit high school has access to Wayne State, but also has access to free tuition at our community college system. And I think more and more you're going to see community-based organizations stepping up, because the fact remains this level of upskilling and training is absolutely the critical piece in this equation to solve the healthcare staffing crisis that we are seeing across the board. So
Ron, I wanted to
let's talk
add a
yes.
little color to what Jackie was saying in terms of like public-private partnerships. I think like the reality in the industry right now is there is this negative stigma towards, the private industry, private training providers. But I think that there's so much value and power to figuring out how to launch these public and private partnerships under the right realm. And I'm actually pretty encouraged to see, the eligibility of Pell Grants coming in potentially 2026. Some people have said might not launch until 2027. They still haven't kind of considered the rules. But I like what the anticipated rules are. I think that the higher education institution who is very much focused on launching a ventures division or a workforce development division to help solve critical staffing shortages and to be more relevant with their employer partners, I think they should have direct oversight into these programs. I think they should own the outcomes of those programs and in part teach that instruction. So there's a lot of rules regarding what percent does higher ed own versus what percent does the private training provider own? Is it just a content license deal? I think the reality is the private industry is here to help. Higher education doesn't always have the funds to develop, launch, and manage these programs, although they're highly relevant and they can help with long-term enrollments. They can help get people into skills-based training through certification training, but also have that educational attainment pathway, articulate that transfer credit towards degrees. I also think there's too much negative stigma potentially in the industry regarding the value of a college degree. I actually think the college degree is very valuable. I think we should be really careful as to what we're saying in the market. You know, I know that a pretty large employer who kind of eliminated the need to have a degree to work at on site. And what they're finding is that the soft skills are really lacking, right? And the accountability is lacking. People aren't showing up on time. They're not showing up for work, right? You go to get that 2 or 4 year degree, you're showing a commitment. You got that diploma. I mean, in and of itself, that's valuable. But
You're a completer,
again,
right?
I think there's the major value of the public-private partnerships is private industry can really help launch new programs and support them. Public market, higher ed, they have the relationships with workforce agencies, with the health systems or other types of employers. And when you bring all the right ingredients to the table and all the right partners who have their own unique core capabilities, and you're consistent with it, I think it leads to incredible outcomes. And all those KPIs Tammy was talking about, time to fill, retention specifically, and building a feeder system for advanced degrees, and you're really helping the higher education market continue to stay relevant as they should.
Jason, I just want to throw in there, as this is a call out to all of my healthcare people out there. We need our clinical champions. Something that's been key to my success in this work is we're partnering alongside nurses, partnering alongside the CNOs, the frontline peri-op services teams, because my message is always this: we always want to have quality care, and people are less fearful about change when they realize we're not trying to replace what already works well. Our local schools, our higher ed partners are essential, but we need to think about ways to add further to our talent supply. And so once people, I've done change management in healthcare for 30 years and the first electronic health records and all these things. We fear what we don't understand. But if we include people, we need clinical champions like I've experienced with surgical tech projects, opening a nursing school to help with some workforce challenges. My message has always been this: not going to take away from higher ed. We always need higher ed. So I have a master's in education. But what we're trying to do is, if we don't create more ADN nurses to, stackable credentials, to go to BSN, my goal with a associate's nursing program was really to help with the nursing instructor shortage. And so when you articulate these big picture pieces and you say to clinical leaders, look, this is the plan, and I want to help solve the challenge also for higher ed. We need master's prepared nurses and beyond to help solve this challenge. Then it's not so scary, and they understand this is for the greater good of our industry. So it's just something I'm very passionate about, but there is a need for all of this in this space. There's a place for all of us, and it's really not to replace anything. It's just to make it better.
Pay it forward, right? So the next generation of future talent, specifically in healthcare, and help them avoid, all that debt that frankly, it's unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm going to turn to our audience again. Lisa Smith-Maxim asked a really good question. I'm going to substitute her for the question I was about to ask you guys. And she's asking, we're looking for a balance of people and providers of all sizes. You need the good combination of education experience. And where do we find this? So her question is, and I'm going to pose it to each of the four of you, is what stone do we have to unturn to find these people? When we're talking about non-traditional talent pools, Jason, where do you think employers should be looking to expand that talent pool?
I'm going to punt this one over to the pro, and I would ask Tammy to answer that question first.
It's the high schools. Hello to any guidance counselors or career counselors out there. It is our high schools, and figuring out ways to engage with them as young as we can. I know there's age requirements, and we've talked earlier about apprenticeships with healthcare. it's always a little bit more of a challenge because we have a lot of important regulation because of patient care and safety. But I would say high schools, career changers, we need to go out to people and say,
Mhm.
we're competing with other industries that can make similar income at an entry level role, but they don't have to go to school. So we have to create these pathways in the door and just show them what's possible. It takes a flyer, it takes a sign up here. But when people go to apply and they get rejected and are told they have to do multiple prereqs and take Math 101 again, it's really saying to the world, there is a place in healthcare for all of us. And let's figure out
Right.
how we can get you there, and let's make it easier to access. So I think high school is a great talent supply. I think going out to our community organizations, I've had great conversations with workforce boards across the country, and they tell me we want to do a better job of engaging with industry. So it's having conversations like this, and the conversation is great, but then we have to execute. We have to figure out the path and got to find an easier button for this.
I just want to say,
Yeah, I
to
think
Tony's
that's a really
I
good
mean,
point, and I think we have to expand where we're having these conversations. I give a small shout out to my local healthcare provider, Henry Ford. They were looking at a massive talent shortage in non-clinical areas, and so if you look at the demographics of Detroit, it doesn't bode well for healthcare because they're 25% of the adult population in our city do not have a high school credential. So Henry Ford got really um, really creative, and they're offering now an opportunity for people to study for the GED, complete the GED, and then get a raise and an automatic job in one of the non-clinical areas in the hospital. And so I think employers have to look at these sort of creative ways to build that talent pipeline because it's uh, Tina's right, Lisa's right, they're we have to look elsewhere, you know. So let's talk about leveraging the funding. What steps can training providers and academic partners take today to best access? This is a tricky one, folks, and that's the WIOA. With all my time in Washington working on WIOA in 2014, I remind people now when WIOA is up for grabs and up for revision that it took 20 years to revise WIA. And so we're only 11 years into WIOA. So with this Congress, I see it's a long-term play. So how do you navigate WIOA funding, state grants, federal DOL apprenticeship funds to provide zero-cost training to students and employers? Jackie, you want to take that one up?
Oh, how did you know I wanted to take that one up?
I can see it. I can see it in
Yeah.
your eyes. I'm trying to get the lights
No,
back on in here. Sorry,
so
guys.
the whole funding part of it, that's really my broader background. But having worked with workforce development and being very close with the funding streams, those haven't shifted too much over the years. And what's interesting is that a lot of businesses don't know the types of funding that exists at the state level, whether it's incumbent worker training grants, whether it's at the local level through the workforce board, as employed worker training or on the job training or apprenticeship funding. These are funding streams that companies can tap into to either help support training costs, offset their training costs for their employees, or even potentially offset the wages. So in the case of apprenticeships, you might help scale up what it is that you're able to pay for an individual that's a new hire or an existing hire that you're upskilling. So there are funding streams to do that. That's a pass through from the federal government to the states through the workforce board. So contacting your local workforce board, even going on their website, being able to see what these grants are that you could just apply for as a company. At the same time, the states have their own paid training grants. I know Florida has Open Door. That's great for short-term programs that you may not tap into as a company, but you may be able to direct your employees who can capitalize on that on their own dime. So there's a lot of different types of funds that are separate from those are cyclical, right? They're every year, and the sooner you you jump on them, starting in July, so the fiscal year runs July to June. The sooner you're tapping into that before the funding runs out, that's your best option. And at the same time, I also want to mention that there are target population. There are funds, specific carve outs for targeted populations for youth 18 to 24, say, for example, for veterans. So there may be specific funding streams that, even though the big ones have run out, the popular ones, the funding stream may run out, there may be other ways to tap into some funding that maybe other companies don't use all that much. So just keep mindful of that. Get to know your workforce board. They'll really know all of those, the funding streams, even the community college,
right.
a lot of it has to run through them.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. We're coming to the top of the hour. So a shout out to our our titans of industry here on this conversation. You guys have just really rocked it. I think you've come up with a lot of very practical, get it together, get it done now kind of propositions. We have to scale these solutions if we want to solve a massive talent crisis that we're facing in healthcare. So I think all of you brought a lot to the table. Same time, I got a couple other things I want to share. I want to go around. This will be the lightning round where dollar values are doubled, but I want each of the four of you to give me one last thought about what you'd want to share with the audience. And Jason, I'm going to start with you. What's the last thought?
I think that there's, very short-term opportunities to fill critical staffing roles for certain occupations like medical assisting, patient care, surge tech, sterile processing that lead to an employee that will stick with you for quite a while and to continually get trained and advance their career with you and obtain those degree granting programs. And I would really urge you to look for training providers that have partnerships with higher education that also can bring funding to the table, who can navigate grants, apprenticeship training, workforce boards, incumbent worker training funds on your behalf. Because I know budgets are tight right now. And so think about a very strategic partner and someone that could really be an extension of your HR department.
Great. Tammy.
Jason, I agree with everything. I agree with everything Jason just said. So it's hard to follow that, but I'll throw something out there. Healthcare employers, take a deep breath. I've worked 30 years in healthcare, and I've never seen just the trying to fill these workforce challenges so turbulent. It's so turbulent right now. We've got a lot of change coming, and I just want to say, you should give yourself a pat in the back and stay tough. That's why we're in healthcare. That's why we're in human resources, because we want to make an impact. But try not to get stuck in reactionary mode. I've been a part of things since COVID and all these different changes we've had. We have to be the change leaders. We have to think about we can't do it, because we have to get this done. So don't be afraid. Don't be fearful of the unknown. Reach out to leaders like they're in this forum. I'm happy to be a resource. I've implemented this kind of thing multiple times in healthcare organizations. Be that change leader. Be the hero of your organization. Healthcare, we're about community. We have to open doors for all into these healthcare careers, and that's going to be a win for all of us. So don't feel like you have to do it on your own. We've got great partners that are in this room.
Jackie, any last minute thought?
I'm so glad you said that, Tammy, and then I was next, because you're not in this alone, right? And I think about, and when I started off talking about partnerships, you can't do it alone, right? There's so many jobs, especially in nursing alone. You all are clamoring for nurses. So I look at those sector-based strategies, right? How can you come together as organizations? How can you come together as cross-sector partners when we talk about nonprofits and we talk about education? Engage in those types of efforts. The more you engage in that, you're going to see the return, and it's so much easier by not doing it alone, right? And being able to channel that pipeline of nurses or whatever that occupation is, or those key occupations. The more you come together to really energize around, it'll be clearer for individuals out in the community that these are the jobs for them, these are the wages they can be making, and that you're the company they could be going and working for. The more you do that, that's exactly that pipeline that's just going to come. And it doesn't matter what the occupation is. So those are my final words.
Geoffrey, bring us home now. What's your last thought for the audience before we take a wrap?
I would just say, Tammy mentioned this earlier, but think about your clinical leaders who are really facing the true crisis, and leverage them to help fight the good fight, to make these investments. Sometimes it's actually those individuals more than HR that will have the pull to try a pilot out, and then see if it works. I would also just add, like, when you look at this work, it's really systems level thinking. And so you really need, to Jason's point, a really good skills and training provider that knows how to work with a workforce board, that knows how to write grants, that knows how to think very much outside the box, and frankly, that can move quick, because higher ed can't always, they're not all national universities that can move as quick, right? And so we have to leverage that piece. And then the final piece that I would just add is, to Tammy's point, remember healthcare is special. And so don't just accept no as an answer. Think about how you make this truly a career and economic mobility opportunity, not just for your workforce, but for your future workforce. And when you reach deep into those schools, you're going to see the future is going to be powerful.
Well, thank you to the four of you. I have a couple last minute announcements. First of all, I cannot thank our participants, audience out there, for being so engaged in this. Kelsey has just made a recommendation that we put Tammy forward for world president, and I'm going to second that nomination, Tammy. But lots of great feedback from all of you out there. And so here's what I'm going to remind you. Number one, these four are all available. But Kelsey, you also asked about part two. I have some exciting news, and that is our sponsor, Jason Aubrey from Skill Trade, has agreed to make this an ongoing series. So two things to consider with this. Number one, come back for the second one. We're going to continue this conversation, and we'll be sharing more information in the coming days about when and where that'll take place. And secondly, volunteer to be part of this conversation. So many of you offered really wise and insights to advance this conversation. Put yourself forward as a potential panelist for our next and ongoing series with this. Jason's ready to invest in this conversation, and I think it's because of the kind of guy he is, because of his recognition of the importance of this issue. And so thank you, Jason. And thank you to all of you who have joined us. Let's carry this conversation forward and make some good things happen. I'm your host, Ron Stefanski. Thanks until the next time. Signing off from Skill Trade. Take care.